We often think witches belong to fairy tales, old hags flying on broomsticks, casting spells in the dead of night. But what if I told you the real witches are not in forests or folklore? What if they live inside your mind? These witches don't wear cloaks or chant incantations. No, they quietly poison your thoughts, sabotage your peace, and slowly destroy your most important relationships. And the scariest part, most of us don't even know they're there. These witches aren't people. They are habits, emotions, patterns, and illusions that settle deep in your soul. They whisper things like, "You're not good enough," "They don't really love you," or "You always get hurt." These thoughts become the spells that break the bond between hearts. They turn love into resentment, trust into suspicion, and unity into separation. We all want to be loved. We all want meaningful connection. But what if, instead of looking at others and blaming them, we looked within? What if we realized that the witch breaking our relationship is not outside, but inside? You may be thinking, why would I sabotage something I care about? But pain doesn't always ask permission. Wounds don't always bleed. Sometimes they stay hidden, festering in silence, showing up later as anger, fear, or distance. The truth is, we carry invisible baggage from our past, disappointments, betrayals, unresolved guilt, and we bring that baggage into every relationship, every hug, every argument. These inner witches don't scream, they whisper. They show up as jealousy, insecurity, control, or cold silence. They turn small misunderstandings into wars, moments of fear into storms of doubt, and unless we become aware of them, they will continue to haunt every bond we build. But it doesn't have to be this way. The moment you choose to awaken, to become aware of your inner landscape, is the moment you begin to disarm these witches. Awareness is the antidote, self-honesty is the sword, and healing is the spell that breaks the curse. Now, let me guide you through 6 silent witches that commonly haunt our relationships. 6 enemies dressed in emotions that many mistake as truth. These witches live in us all. But once you see them clearly, they lose their power. One of the most powerful and deceptive forces that secretly erodes a relationship is not anger or betrayal. It's expectation. It doesn't shout, it doesn't fight, and it doesn't storm in like an obvious threat. It sneaks in silently and disguises itself as love. But in truth, it's not love. It's control wearing the mask of care. When we enter relationships, we often carry with us an invisible blueprint of how love should look, how our partner should behave, what they should say, how they should respond, and even how they should comfort us without being told. This blueprint isn't shared. It lives quietly in the background of our mind. But we assume our partner should somehow see it, understand it, and live up to it without needing to be asked. That's the witch of expectation at work. It casts its spell when you think, if they really cared, they would just know. It whispers, "I shouldn't have to tell them. I want it to come from them." It feeds the belief that love should be automatic, that understanding should be instinctive, and that someone who truly loves you should never make mistakes or overlook your needs. But this mindset turns love into a test and your partner into a performer. The moment they fail to meet an expectation you never expressed, resentment begins to grow. You feel unseen, misunderstood, maybe even unloved. And instead of opening up, you close down, you distance yourself. You keep score. You wait for them to figure it out while nursing silent disappointment. What makes this even more dangerous is that expectation is often built on past pain. If someone hurt you before by not showing up, your next partner may carry the burden of proving they're different, even though you never told them what that burden was. You expect them to fill your emotional gaps, to comfort you the way you weren't comforted in the past, to respond the way someone else failed to respond. These expectations become subconscious conditions. You don't realize it, but you're saying, "Make me feel safe. Show me I'm worthy. Heal what someone else broke," without ever speaking the words. And when your partner doesn't deliver the right response in the right way at the right time, your pain reactivates. You withdraw, you punish them, but the truth is, they didn't even know they were being tested. Expectations aren't bad when they are spoken. clear, and realistic. It's human to want consistency, support, and connection. But when expectations go unspoken, they become silent agreements that only one person is aware of. It's like writing a script and getting angry that your partner didn't memorize their lines, when they never saw the script in the first place. You set them up to fail, not out of cruelty, but out of unconsciousness. That's the curse of this particular witch. It doesn't scream, it doesn't accuse, it quietly creates a gap between two people. A gap filled with assumptions, misunderstandings, and unmet needs. When you carry these silent expectations, you stop experiencing your partner as they are and start reacting to who you think they should be. Every time they fall short, you feel more disconnected, and eventually love becomes conditional. They feel judged, you feel neglected. They feel pressured, you feel unappreciated. You both start performing instead of connecting. The relationship begins to suffocate under the weight of what it should be, rather than being nourished by what it is. What we often forget is that people express love differently. Some are vocal, others are quiet. Some show up with gifts, others with presence. Some soothe with words, others with actions. When you cling too tightly to a specific expectation, you might completely miss the way your partner is already loving you, just in their own way. You might miss the warmth in their silence, the meaning behind their small gestures, or the quiet strength of their consistency. Instead of feeling grateful, you feel deprived, not because you aren't loved, but because you weren't loved the way you demanded to be. If you want a real connection, you have to let go of the fantasy that someone will intuitively meet all your needs. That's not love, that's illusion. Real love begins with vulnerability. It begins when you're brave enough to say, "This is what I need," and open enough to hear, "This is what I can give." When you communicate instead of expect, you create clarity. When you ask instead of assume, you create safety. And when you release the need for perfection, you create space for growth. We all long to be understood, but understanding doesn't happen by magic. It happens by mutual willingness, by shared effort, and by the courage to meet each other halfway. The witch of expectation loses its power the moment you stop demanding to be mine. Read and start engaging with honesty. That's how you protect your love from the quiet poison that turns relationships cold, not with demands, but with awareness, communication, and compassion. There is a shadow that walks silently behind many relationships. It does not speak loudly, nor does it introduce itself when love begins. Instead, it waits patiently, watching. It follows you into every conversation, every argument, every silence. This shadow is your past pain, unhealed, unspoken, and unresolved. It doesn't ask for permission to enter your current relationship. It simply walks in with you. What's so dangerous about this kind of pain is that it doesn't always show itself in obvious ways. It doesn't always look like sadness or crying. Sometimes it shows up as defensiveness, withdrawal, or even sudden anger that seems out of proportion to the situation. You tell yourself you're reacting to what just happened, but deep inside you're actually reacting to something that happened long ago. Every time someone broke your trust, judged you unfairly, ignored your needs, or walked away when you needed them most, those moments carved wounds into your emotional memory, and unless you've consciously healed those wounds, they remain open, raw, and easily triggered. You may not realize it, but those old experiences become filters through which you see your current relationship. A harmless comment feels like criticism. A moment of distance feels like abandonment. A delay in response feels like rejection. Your partner doesn't understand why you're so hurt, and you can't explain it either, because what you're feeling isn't just about them. It's about everyone who came before them. This pain becomes the lens through which you interpret love. You're not responding to your partner as they are. You're responding to them as if they're just like the ones who hurt you. It's like you're in a movie, but the script was written by your past. Your partner says one thing, but you hear another. They walk away to get space, but you feel like they're walking out of your life. They forget to say something you needed to hear, and you take it as a confirmation of your deepest fear, that you don't matter. And slowly, without even realizing it, you start punishing them for someone else's crime. The most tragic part of this cycle is that your partner often has no idea what they are up against. They don't understand why certain topics are landmines, why small mistakes turn into emotional explosions, or why you sometimes pull away without explanation. They're trying to love you, but they're also fighting ghosts they can't see. You want closeness, but you're afraid of being hurt again. You want honesty, but you flinch when it's offered. You long for safety, but the moment things start to feel too real, too deep, or too good, you begin to sabotage it, just to protect yourself from what might come next. This is what the witch of past pain does. It makes you believe you're protecting yourself by staying guarded, by overanalyzing, by keeping one foot out the door just in case. But in reality, you're not protecting anything. You're just making it impossible for the love you want to truly reach you. You become emotionally unavailable without realizing it. You say you want intimacy, but you're afraid to be seen. You say you want truth, but you're afraid of what truth might reveal. And eventually, the connection you once held so close begins to break. Not because there wasn't love, but because there wasn't healing. Healing your past pain isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about acknowledging it, feeling it fully, and releasing the belief that your future must look like your past. It means having the courage to sit with your pain rather than project it. It means being honest with yourself when you're overreacting, when you're assuming the worst, when you're clinging too tightly or pushing too hard. It means asking yourself, am I responding to this person, or am I reacting to someone else from years ago? That level of honesty is uncomfortable, but it's also where your freedom begins. Your past may explain your behavior, but it doesn't excuse it. You have the power to choose differently. You have the right to heal, to grow, and to create a relationship that is not chained to history. But it won't happen by accident. It will happen when you stop blaming your partner for your triggers and start understanding where those triggers come from. When you stop expecting others to fix your pain and start doing the work to soothe it yourself. Every time you choose to pause before reacting, every time you choose to speak gently instead of shutting down, every time you say, "This reminds me of something painful from before, and I need your patience," you are breaking the spell. You are choosing presence over projection. You are choosing connection over self-protection, and that choice, repeated consistently, becomes the new foundation of trust. Your partner deserves to meet the real you, not the version of you shaped by pain. And you deserve to experience love not through the lens of fear, but through the clarity of healing. When you take responsibility for your past, you create space for a future that looks nothing like it. And that is how you finally make peace with the ghost in the room, not by denying it, but by facing it, feeling it, and letting it go. Insecurity is a quiet thief. It doesn't barge in and destroy your relationship with one big blow. It works slowly, secretly, and steadily. It creeps into your mind in moments of silence, in the gaps between texts, in the pause after a disagreement. It makes you question, doubt, overthink, and replay. It causes you to read between lines that were never written and listen for tones that were never spoken. What starts as a whisper becomes an internal storm, until you find yourself struggling with a reality that only exists in your imagination. It's not that your partner has changed, it's that your own fear has created a story that keeps you from seeing clearly. Insecurity tells you that you're not good enough. It tells you that love is fragile, that your partner might lose interest, that any moment of emotional distance is a sign they're slipping away. It doesn't matter how many times they reassure you, how consistently they show up, or how much love they give, because insecurity always finds a way to twist reality. It makes you feel like you need constant validation just to feel safe, just to believe that everything is okay. And even when you get that validation, it's never quite enough. It fades quickly, like water through your hands, and soon you need more. This pattern exhausts both people in a relationship. The person feeling insecure is trapped in emotional hunger, always craving reassurance. The partner, no matter how devoted, starts to feel like they can never do enough to keep the peace. Over time, the relationship stops feeling like a partnership and starts feeling like a burden. The love that once flowed freely begins to feel strained and conditional, dependent not on presence, but on performance. Insecurity often doesn't come from the current relationship. It's usually rooted in past rejection, abandonment, betrayal, or childhood experiences of not being seen or affirmed. Those old emotional imprints become internal beliefs. I'm not lovable. I'll be left. I have to earn love by proving myself. These beliefs act like silent scripts running in the background. No matter how good things are, no matter how kind your partner is, your mind looks for danger. You become hyper, aware of every shift in tone, every delay in response, every forgotten word. And instead of seeing these moments for what they are, just human imperfections, you interpret them as signs of rejection. This creates a cycle that is hard to break. You start to test your partner without even realizing it. You might withdraw to see if they'll chase you. You might pick small fights to see if they'll fight for you. You might accuse them of losing interest just to hear them say they haven't. But these patterns slowly damage the trust between you. They turn love into an emotional test instead of an emotional home. And eventually, your partner may begin to feel punished for simply being human. They may start walking on eggshells, unsure of how to calm your anxiety without sacrificing their own peace. What makes insecurity so powerful is that it disguises itself as truth. It doesn't say, "I'm afraid." It says they don't care. It doesn't say, "I'm hurting." It says they're doing this on purpose. It doesn't say, "I need help." It says, "I can't trust them." And so instead of opening up and expressing vulnerability, you armor up and defend. You may become distant, cold, overly critical, or emotionally volatile, not because you want to push your partner away, but because you're afraid they're already halfway out the door. But real security in a relationship doesn't come from constant reassurance. It comes from building a stable sense of self. You cannot expect another person to carry the weight of your worth. That's too heavy a burden for love to hold. You have to learn how to affirm yourself, how to soothe your own fear, how to sit with discomfort without reacting destructively. You have to practice believing you are worthy of love even when you don't feel lovable, especially when things aren't perfect. Because love is not about perfection. It's about presence. It's about two imperfect people showing up, again and again, with honesty and intention. To begin healing insecurity, you have to first own it, not as a flaw, but as a wound. You must stop blaming your partner for feelings they didn't cause and start recognizing when fear is speaking louder than truth. When you feel anxious or doubtful, ask yourself, what am I really afraid of right now? Is it that they don't love you, or is it that you're afraid you're unlovable? Is it that they're distant, or is it that you're afraid of being abandoned again? The moment you can name the fear behind the reaction, you give yourself the power to change the response. Insecurity is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that something within you needs care. When you begin tending to that part of yourself with compassion instead of criticism, you start to shift. You stop seeking validation and start offering yourself understanding. You stop reacting to fear and start responding to reality. You stop demanding love and start receiving it. Let me know when you're ready for Keynote 4, or if you'd like support crafting a conclusion or visual content to match. Control is a subtle force that can feel like care. It can be disguised as protection, love, planning, or leadership. It can show up as wanting to make sure everything is right, everything is safe, and everything is understood. But at its root, control is about fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of being hurt, fear of things falling apart. So instead of allowing love to breathe, to unfold, to surprise us, we try to manage it, mold it, and steer it into a shape we feel comfortable with. We try to take ownership not just of the relationship, but of the other person, and we justify it by saying, "I just care," or "I just want what's best." But slowly, the more we grip, the more we squeeze the life out of the love we so desperately want to keep. Control doesn't always look like shouting or demanding. Sometimes it looks like constant checking in, needing to know where someone is, what they're doing, who they're with, and what time they'll be home. Sometimes it looks like offering advice that isn't asked for, correcting the other person's words, or constantly trying to improve them for their own good. Sometimes it looks like emotional manipulation, subtle guilt, withholding affection, or using silence to punish. Sometimes it looks like always needing to be right, never accepting another way of doing things, or reacting with anxiety every time the other person shows independence. These actions don't always come from a desire to dominate. They often come from a deep place of vulnerability that hasn't been healed, a place where love feels fragile, where letting go even a little feels like losing everything. Many people who struggle with control learned it as a survival tool. Maybe they grew up in chaos, where nothing felt safe, and they had to become their own protector. Maybe they experienced betrayal, and the pain taught them to never trust fully again. Maybe they loved deeply once, and that love ended without warning, leaving them with the belief that love must be tightly managed or it will disappear. So control becomes a strategy, a way to manage the discomfort of uncertainty, a way to keep people close by dictating the terms, a way to feel powerful in a world where love once made them feel powerless. But here's the paradox: the more you try to control someone, the more they will pull away. Not because they don't love you, but because real love requires freedom. People need space to be themselves, to have their own thoughts, to make their own choices, to evolve in their own timing. When love is only accepted on the condition that it looks and feels the way you demand, it is no longer love. It becomes submission, and no one thrives in that space. The person being controlled starts to feel small, unseen, and disrespected. They stop being honest because honesty feels dangerous. They start to hide parts of themselves just to keep the peace. And the person doing the controlling never feels truly secure, because deep down they know that the love they are receiving is being managed, not freely given. A relationship based on control becomes a performance. It may appear stable from the outside, but inside there is tension, resentment, and fear. The controller feels exhausted, always trying to anticipate and correct. The controlled feels suffocated, always second, guessing and suppressing. Communication breaks down, intimacy fades, and eventually the very thing control was meant to protect, closeness, is destroyed by the control itself. To step away from control is not to stop caring. It is to understand that real connection requires trust. It requires the ability to let someone be different than you, to make mistakes, to choose for themselves, and still be worthy of love. It means releasing the belief that things have to go away to be okay. It means giving your partner room to breathe, knowing that space is not a threat, but a sign of maturity. It means recognizing that you cannot love someone into obedience. You can only love them into freedom, and that freedom is what gives love its power. Control often rises when we feel most vulnerable, when we fear being abandoned, replaced, rejected, or forgotten. And so the real work is not in managing your partner, it's in meeting that vulnerability with compassion instead of control. When you feel the urge to micromanage, ask yourself, what am I afraid of right now? When you feel anger that they're doing something differently than you would, ask, what part of me feels unsafe? These questions aren't meant to make you feel weak. They're meant to help you heal. Because once you begin to trust yourself, you stop needing to control everything around you. You start to allow the relationship to unfold naturally, with openness instead of fear. No one wants to be controlled, but everyone wants to be understood. And often, control is just a desperate attempt to feel understood, to feel safe, to feel certain in a world that rarely offers certainty. But love isn't built in certainty, it's built in trust, in the daily decision to show up for one another with curiosity instead of command, with presence instead of pressure, with surrender instead of strategy. Comparison is one of the most dangerous illusions that creeps into a relationship. It starts silently, like a whisper in the mind. You see someone else's relationship and begin to measure. You notice how someone else's partner behaves and begin to question. You hear stories of grand gestures, constant romance, or seemingly perfect communication, and suddenly your own relationship feels small, lacking, or broken. The witch of comparison doesn't yell, it suggests. It places images in your mind and makes you believe that what others have is better than what you're building. And without realizing it, you begin to view your partner not for who they are, but for who they are not. This mindset robs you of presence. It blinds you to the beauty of the person in front of you. You stop appreciating what they do right and start obsessing over what they don't do at all. You measure their worth by how closely they match an invisible standard, often based on things that aren't even real. You scroll through photos, watch videos, listen to stories, and forget that most of what you're comparing your relationship to is curated, filtered, and edited. You don't see the arguments behind the smiles or the silence behind the highlight reels, but you compare your reality to someone else's performance and wonder why it doesn't measure up. Over time, comparison becomes poison. You start planting seeds of doubt, not because your relationship is broken, but because you keep feeding your mind with alternate versions of how things should be. You may begin to feel like your partner isn't romantic enough, expressive enough, successful enough, attractive enough. Not because they changed, but because your attention shifted. You stop noticing their efforts because you're too busy noticing someone else's fantasy. You begin to lose sight of what you have, chasing the shadow of what you think you deserve. But love doesn't thrive in shadows. It grows in the light of truth, presence, and appreciation. When you compare, you forget context. You forget that every relationship is shaped by the two people inside it. Their history, their personalities, their wounds, their growth, their timing. No two loves are alike, and no two journeys are meant to look the same. Just because someone else's love story looks more poetic on the surface doesn't mean it's deeper than yours. Just because someone else posts about constant date nights doesn't mean they don't also deal with disconnection behind closed doors. When you allow comparison to rule your mind, you begin to chase after fantasies that may not even be real. And in the process, you miss the opportunity to truly build something authentic and lasting with the person you chose. Comparison also affects your self-esteem. It doesn't just make you question your partner. It makes you question yourself. You begin to wonder if you're enough. You ask yourself if you're falling behind, if you're in the right relationship, if someone better is out there. These thoughts create internal pressure. That pressure creates resentment. That resentment creates distance. And before long, you start looking at your relationship as if it's a problem to fix instead of a gift to protect. Even worse, when comparison becomes a habit, it turns into competition. You start trying to outperform other couples instead of working on connection. You want to prove your relationship is good instead of making sure it actually is. You force moments, manufacture displays of love, and prioritize how things look over how they feel. But love that's constantly being performed loses its soul. The deepest relationships don't need to be proven to anyone. They're built in quiet moments, in honest conversations, in the spaces where no one is watching. To break free from the witch of comparison, you must first return to your own heart. Ask yourself what matters to you, not to the world, not to social media, not to your peers, but to you. What kind of love makes you feel alive? What kind of connection brings you peace? What kind of relationship allows you to grow, to be seen, to be safe? When you define love on your own terms, you stop measuring it by someone else's scale. You start realizing that value isn't found in public displays, grand gestures, or surface-level perfection. It's found in the way your partner listens to you when you're tired, stands by you when you're anxious, holds space for your dreams, and shows up when it's inconvenient. Gratitude is the antidote to comparison. When you focus on what your partner does right, when you pause to see their efforts, when you recognize how they love you in the only way they know how, you begin to soften. You begin to let go of the imaginary standard and embrace the beautiful, messy, evolving love you're actually living in. You stop longing for what others have and start nurturing what you've been given. And that's where real intimacy grows, not in the illusion of perfection, but in the truth of presence. Let me know when you're ready for keynote 6, or if you'd like help weaving all of these notes into a compelling full speech or visual interpretation. Avoidance is a quiet destroyer of relationships. It doesn't scream, doesn't slam doors, and doesn't always walk out. Instead it stays, but emotionally absent. It keeps you physically present while emotionally unavailable. It convinces you that silence is safer than honesty, that walking away from hard conversations is easier than walking through them, and that numbing your feelings is better than expressing them. But in the process it builds a wall between you and your partner. A wall made not of bricks and cement, but of things unsaid, feelings repressed and wounds ignored. At first, avoidance may seem harmless. Maybe you don't want to start an argument. Maybe you don't want to seem too emotional or too sensitive. So you keep things inside. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. You suppress what hurt you. You minimize your needs. You delay the hard conversations. But avoidance has a way of growing in the dark. The things you avoid don't disappear. They deepen. They wait in silence until one day they come out as anger, resentment, or complete emotional withdrawal. When you avoid discomfort, you also avoid growth. Relationships are not built on constant ease. They are built on repair, on talking through things that feel vulnerable, on showing your rawness and allowing someone else to meet you there. But avoidance shuts that door. It tells you you're better off not saying anything, or they won't understand, or if you open up they'll leave. So instead of building bridges, you build distance, and that distance over time feels like detachment. It becomes harder to connect, harder to trust, harder to feel close. The love might still be there, but it's trapped behind emotional walls. Many people avoid because they were never taught how to deal with emotional intensity. Maybe in childhood, expressing emotion was punished or dismissed. Maybe conflict meant danger. Maybe honesty was met with abandonment. So avoidance became a form of protection, a way to stay safe, a way to stay in control. But the same defense that once kept you safe is now keeping you from love, because love requires openness. It requires emotional exposure. It requires sitting in the discomfort of not always knowing what comes next. And avoidance robs you of that. It replaces intimacy with emptiness, not because you don't care, but because you don't feel safe enough to show it. Avoidance isn't just about dodging conflict. It also shows up as busyness, constantly working, constantly distracting yourself, constantly numbing out with phones, screens, entertainment, or even overserving others. It shows up as changing the subject every time emotions come up, making jokes when something serious is mentioned, or pretending everything is okay when you're actually struggling inside. These behaviors may look harmless, but over time, they create emotional starvation. Your partner may start to feel unseen, unheard, or unimportant. They may begin to feel like they're in a one-sided relationship, always reaching out, always initiating, always holding the emotional weight. Eventually, avoidance creates loneliness on both sides. The person avoiding feels emotionally isolated because they've buried their feelings for so long, they no longer know how to express them. The partner feels emotionally abandoned because despite being close in proximity, the connection feels distant. You can sleep in the same bed, eat at the same table, and still feel like strangers if avoidance becomes the unspoken pattern. And what once started as protection becomes the very reason the relationship begins to deteriorate. Avoidance also fuels assumptions. When communication is avoided, people start filling in the gaps with their own interpretations. Why is he so distant? Why won't she talk to me? Did I do something wrong? Maybe they just don't love me anymore. These thoughts become louder the longer the silence stretches, and instead of clarity, confusion grows. Instead of intimacy, insecurity takes over. The relationship becomes a guessing game, a series of silent questions never answered, and emotional needs never met. To move beyond avoidance, you have to learn to sit with discomfort. Discomfort is not your enemy. It's a sign that something meaningful is happening.
When you feel the urge to shut down, to walk away, to change the subject, pause, ask yourself why. What are you afraid to feel?
What are you afraid to reveal? Avoidance isn't about avoiding your partner, it's about avoiding yourself. And until you face your own emotions, you will never feel safe enough to share them with someone else. It takes courage to speak honestly, to say, I'm hurt, I'm scared, I don't know what to do, or this matters to me. But that kind of vulnerability is what creates real closeness. It's not weakness, it's strength. It's not about being dramatic, it's about being real. And in a relationship, being real is the only path to real connection. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to be willing to show up. Messy, emotional, imperfect. And say, I care enough to talk about this. That moment, though small, begins the undoing of the witch of avoidance. And slowly, brick by brick, the wall comes down. So when we say witches break your relationship, we're not talking about magic spells or fairy tale villains. We're talking about the invisible forces that creep in unnoticed, slowly turning love cold. Doubt whispers lies. Insecurity feeds fear. Resentment poisons the heart. Control masks itself as care. Comparison blinds us to our blessings. And avoidance starves connection. These are the silent saboteurs that tear apart even the strongest bond. Not all at once, but piece by piece, day by day, through little moments we don't even realize matter. But the truth is, you are not powerless. You don't have to surrender your love to these ghosts. The antidote to these witches is presence, self-awareness, and courage. The courage to communicate when it's hard. The humility to heal your own wounds instead of projecting them. The discipline to protect your connection, even when it would be easier to run or shut down. Love is not fragile. It is powerful. But it must be nurtured with honesty, trust, and effort. If you want to break the curse, you have to be willing to look within, to face your own shadows, to stand guard at the gates of your relationship and say, not today. Not today, doubt. Not today, comparison. Not today, fear. Because in the end, love doesn't die from one giant blow. It dies from 1,000 small surrenders to the wrong voices. But if you're willing to fight for your love, not by controlling it, but by protecting the space it lives in, then no witch, no fear, no weakness has the power to tear it apart. The magic isn't in the curse. The real magic is in your choice to heal, to grow, and to love each other better every single day.